Welcome all. This video is about indexing, slicing, and concatenation. Now in Python, we've talked about three different types that look more or less like arrays. We've talked about strings, we've talked about arrays, which remember that's what Python calls a list, and we've talked about tuples. Now everything that I'm going to show you in this video works for all three of these types, except when you're trying to modify the contents. Strings and tuples are both what's called immutable types. It means they can't be changed once they've been defined. So you can only read values out, but in arrays you can actually modify them as well. All right, so what are these here? Let's remind ourselves of the syntax. We can have something like A, B, C. An array could be not parens. It could be 10, 20, 30. And a tuple, well, let's just give it the same three values. All right, so all three of these are the same basic data structure. I mean, Python gives them different names, but they are, when you think about the core computer science concepts, they're all basically the same. This is three boxes in a row that contain the three characters, A, B, and C. This is three boxes in a row that contain three integers, 10, 20, and 30. This is also three boxes in a row that contain integers. Although there are some deep differences between arrays and tuples, for the most part you can just say that a tuple is the same thing as an array, except that you can't change it. All right, so what are operations that you might want to do into these? Well, in all of these, you might want to go access a particular element. And so you would say, what is the third element? Well, Python, as most programming languages do, uses zero-based indexing. So element 0, so bracket 0, here, that's the first element. This element is known as bracket 1, element 1. This element is known as element 2. So if you want to access it, you can say, I want to access x bracket 2. This is the third element of the string, the array, or the tuple. You can use this, of course, to read it. You can say y equals x2, which means read that value out and put it into y. That's probably not surprising to you that you can do that for arrays and tuples, but you can do it for characters as well. X equals ABC, y equals x2. Now what we've done is we've said y is now equal to C. In arrays only, you can also modify it. So you can say x2 is equal to 40. And that would change. That would go to this slot over here in memory and change this value to contain the value 40 instead. All right, what else can you do? Let's talk about negative indices. These are very interesting things. In some languages, negative indices into arrays and strings are invalid. But in Python, they decided to allow negative indices because you'll find that very often what you're doing is you're trying to access things, but you don't really care where their absolute position is. What you care about is how far they are from the end. So this is known as element 2. But there's a second way that you can access it. you can write -1. So element 0 is the very first element. Element 1 is the second. Element 2 is the third. But since this length is 3, -1 is the last element. -1 is the same as 2. This, of course, would be the second to last element. So this is -2. And the third to last element is -3. There you go. So you can do that in strings, you can do that in arrays, you can do that in tuples. All right, well, what's the next thing we can do? We can do slicing. Now, slicing is going through one of these array-like types and making a duplicate of it that has new values, or it stores these values in a new location is a better way I should say it, but it has the same contents. All right, so let's imagine that I want to copy out these two elements out of the array. So we have the array x equals, well, brackets, square brackets, 10, 20, 30. Now we can say y equals x bracket 0 colon 2. Now what's going to happen here? Well, what's going to happen is that Python will actually automatically create a brand new array, new memory that didn't exist before. This will have only 2 elements in it. And what it will do is it will copy the values 10 and 20 in there. Now, this is new storage. It is different than the original array. So what happens if we say x 0 equals 17? If we print x and we print y, if we print x, we're going to get 17, 20, 30. Because we changed x. But when we print y, what we're going to get is 10, 20. Because we copied the values 10 and 20 into a new array that's different than the original. All right, so slicing. It looks like array indexing, but it's got a colon in here. You can use negative indices for either one. But let me first talk about what these indices mean. And I'm going to have to tell you, you're going to find part of this surprising and irritating, but you're going to have to trust me here. When you get to be an experienced programmer, you're going to look back on this and say, Python made the right decision, I just didn't understand it yet. What do these two bounds mean, 0 and 2? This is what's called an inclusive bound. Inclusive. That means that the element 0 is part of this range. So when we say 0 to 2, what we're saying is that this, yes, is part of the range. The second bound is what's known as an exclusive bound. It means we copy everything up to, but not including element 2. Element 2 was over here. So this is not included. So when we do a slice from 0 to 2, this is what we get. We get exactly 2 elements. You'll find that handy. You'll notice that the difference between these two indices is 2. So the resulting array is length 2. How do you want to think of this? Well, you can think of it as inclusive and exclusive bounds, or you can think of it as a line drawn on the left edge of the 0 element and another line drawn on the left edge of element 2. And then this bound starts to make a lot more sense. So when you go from 0 to 2, you're going to get 2 elements. element 0 and element 1. Now I told you that you can use negative bounds. So you can do from 0 to -1. That's kind of interesting. What would that do? Well, it starts at element 0, so element 0 is part of it. We then go out to element 1, and we do not include element 1. What this says is slice everything out of x except for the very last element. If you wanted to remove 2 elements, you could say -2, and so on. Can you slice all the way to the end? Absolutely. You can do from 0 to 3. That is a valid index. I know element 3 does not exist. It would be here. Element 3 does not exist. But when you slice from 0 to 3, what are you doing? You're slicing everything up to but not including element 3. And so this will not throw an exception. It works just fine. Python also has a couple of cool syntaxes you can use to shorthand things. If you want to start the slice at the beginning of your string, of your array, or your tuple, you can just omit the first bound. This is a slice that begins at the very beginning of x and includes all the elements up to but not including element 3. If you want to cut everything from the end or all the way up to the end, you can omit the second one. Here's an interesting one. Little challenge question for you. What do you think that slices? Use the rules that I've told you. Negative indices count from the end of the array. The first value is an inclusive bound, giving you the start of the slice. The second value, if it does not exist, it will go all the way to the end of the array. So what does this slice mean? Well, let's put our indices back in and we'll figure it out. This was index -1. This was index -2. This was index -3. If our slice begins at -2, we'll put the red line here. And we say it wants to go all the way to the end. So what would this slice do? It would copy values 20 and 30 out of the array. All right. Let's see. One more thing I need to show you, which is concatenation. I told you that you cannot modify strings and you cannot modify tuples. You can slice them, right? If we did a slice of this string, we don't change this string. We're creating a new string that never existed before, and this just has fewer characters. Concatenation goes the other way around. Let's take a couple of strings. X equals foo, y equals bar, z equals x plus y. I told you that I would tell you what the plus operator means when you've got a string involved. The plus operator, if it's operating on a string or an array or a tuple, means concatenation of two elements of the same type. What is z right now? It is foo bar. It is a string of exactly 6 characters. It has the 3 characters from x and the 3 characters from y. We have not changed x, we have not changed y. We've just built a brand new string that didn't exist before. There's now 3 strings in memory. Foo, bar, and foo bar. And they're completely unrelated to each other. This same syntax works for lists and tuples. So let's do a tuple. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. If we now say z equals x plus y, then what is z? It is the tuple 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. If these were two arrays, then when you concatenate them together, you get a longer array. Can you mix types? No, you cannot. You can only concatenate a string to a string. You can only concatenate an array to an array, or a tuple to a tuple. But remember, if you go look at the conversions video that I've already given you, you can convert from one type to another. So if you have a tuple and you want to make it an array, you can do that. If you have an array, you want to make it a tuple, you can do it, and so on. Now I was about to end this video, and then I realized that I'd completely overlooked something critical and really, really simple. How do you know how long arrays are? I mean, sure, if you write them, it's obvious. But if you want to write code that will check them dynamically, what do? Well, that's real simple. And this works for all of these types. The length function. That simply returns an integer, which gives you the length of that particular data structure. So those are the basic operations on the array type of data types. There are more things that you can do than this, but these are the most basic things that I wanted to show you first. Hope this video has been informative. I hope you've learned a lot. Bye-bye.